Pamela Anderson has been married 5 times. One of those marriages lasted 12 days. Another happened during the 90-minute intermission of a magic show. In 2006, she had a triple wedding that fell apart in a matter of months, and she built an $8 million dream home in Malibu with her own money, only to sell it and leave California for good in 2021. The reasons go far beyond real estate. There's a miscarriage she rarely spoke about, ugly accusations buried in court filings, and a stolen tape that permanently changed the internet. Her story starts sounding unreal from the very first day. Pamela was born July 1, 1967, in Ladysmith, Canada, on the country's 100th birthday. As the first baby born that day, she was crowned the Centennial Baby, a title that sounded like fate. Local businesses showered the family with cash, gifts, and even a freezer full of meat. But behind that feel-good headline was a normal working-class family barely making ends meet. Her father repaired furnaces through brutal winters. Her mother waited tables, working every shift she could get. There were no vacations, no cushion, no easy path. And Pamela learned early just how dangerous the world could be. Between the ages of 6 and 10, she was secretly abused by a trusted female babysitter who used threats to keep her silent and disguise the abuse as games. She carried that terror completely alone, convinced no one would ever believe her, and it damaged her sense of safety for years. At one point, she even wished the woman would die. When the babysitter later died in a car accident, Pamela was left with a strange, agonizing guilt that only a child could carry. Then things got worse. At 12, she was raped by a friend's older brother during what was supposed to be a harmless backgammon lesson. She was too shocked and too young to fight back, and she survived it in frozen silence. Later, in high school, a boyfriend she trusted arranged for 6 of his friends to assault her. They treated it like a joke. Afterward, she was thrown from a moving vehicle and left bruised on the road. Home offered no safety either. By 17, she'd spent years watching her father's alcoholism fuel unpredictable violence. One night, drunk and enraged, he slammed her mother's head into a hot stove burner. Pamela snapped. She threw herself into the fight and punched him hard enough to draw blood, stopping the violence in that moment. It wasn't a fix, but it was the turning point. She left home for good, working as a waitress and renting a small apartment, just trying to survive. She moved to Vancouver, took jobs at a tanning salon and as an aerobics instructor, simply trying to build something of her own, long before Hollywood ever noticed her. Then, in 1989, everything changed in a way that still sounds made up. 21-year-old Pamela was in the crowd at a BC Lions football game wearing a tight blue Labatt's t-shirt. A cameraman spotted her, put her on the stadium's big screen, and 30,000 people erupted in applause. Labatt's executives watched the reaction and moved fast. They signed her and turned her into the Blue Zone girl, plastering her face across billboards and ads all over Canada. That beer campaign got noticed by Playboy Scouts. Pamela hesitated at first, still a small-town girl uneasy about posing nude for a major magazine, but she eventually flew to Los Angeles for the shoot. When her cover hit newsstands in late 1989, everything changed overnight. She went on to appear on more Playboy covers than any other woman in the magazine's history, becoming one of the defining faces of the decade. That exposure led to a small role on Home Improvement as Lisa, the tool-time girl, mostly smiling and handing over tools. But she made even that brief screen time memorable enough to get noticed. Then Baywatch came calling. She joined in 1992 as C.J. Parker, appearing in 77 episodes over 5 seasons, playing a character with more emotional depth than the show ever got credit for. The red one-piece swimsuit she wore running down the beach became one of the most iconic images of the 90s, endlessly copied and parodied, a symbol of celebrity and sex appeal that also came loaded with impossible beauty standards she never asked to represent. At the same time, she kept her ongoing relationship with Playboy going, creating a strange dual identity, the lifeguard on television and the more explicit icon in print, each feeding the other's fame. By the mid-90s, she wasn't just famous. She was one of the most searched and downloaded women on the early internet, years before social media even existed, making her one of the first celebrities whose image collided directly with the digital age. Then came Tommy Lee, Pamela spotted him across a crowded club on New Year's Eve 1994 and wrote his name on her hand so she wouldn't forget it. He turned up at her Cancun photo shoot days later, and they got married on a beach after knowing each other for just 4 days. She later joked she had to ask his last name on the way home. They had 2 sons, Dylan and Brandon, and became one of Hollywood's most famous couples, chaotic passion barely masking real instability underneath. During their honeymoon on a houseboat, Tommy filmed private footage of the 2 of them and locked it in a safe at their Malibu home. In 1995, a contractor named Rand Gauthier, angry over being fired without pay, broke in and stole that safe. He found the tape, copied it, and pushed it into the early internet, where it spread in ways the legal system had no idea how to stop. Pamela and Tommy fought to block its distribution, but it was already too late. It became one of the first massive internet scandals, an early blueprint for exploiting private material online. And for Pamela, it was never a payday. It was pure trauma that the public turned into a spectacle anyway. Her marriage kept collapsing behind the headlines. In February 1998, Tommy attacked her while she held their infant son. She called 911. He was arrested, pled no contest, and served time for spousal abuse. Pamela filed for divorce, yet she later admitted he was the only time she'd experienced real love, a statement that shows just how tangled fear and affection had become for her. In the middle of all this, she tried to become a movie star with 1996's Barbed Wire, playing a tough bounty hunter in a bleak future America. She threw herself into the physical demands of the role, believing she could pull it off despite doubts from people around her. Her romantic life stayed just as unpredictable. In 2006, she and Kid Rock somehow turned one relationship into 3 weddings in a single month. A yacht ceremony near Saint-Tropez with no legal standing, a quiet courthouse version in Beverly Hills to make it official, and a third public spectacle at a Nashville bar. Just months later, in November 2006, they filed for divorce. Next came Rick Salomon in 2007, a marriage she announced almost casually on Ellen, then got married to during a break in her own Vegas magic show. It lasted just 10 weeks, and she requested an annulment claiming the marriage was based on fraud, never explaining exactly what that meant. Years later, she tried again with Salomon, remarrying quietly in 2014. This time, she suffered a miscarriage during the marriage, and the divorce that followed turned brutal, with both sides making disturbing accusations in court filings. She filed in California, he filed for annulment in Nevada, and they eventually settled, reportedly with him paying her $1 million, both publicly expressing regret over how ugly it had gotten. Then, in 2020, came one of the strangest chapters of all. Pamela appeared to marry Hollywood producer John Peters, a man who'd known her for decades, but the marriage barely lasted 12 days, and many people didn't even learn about it until it was already over. Peters gave an interview afterward that sounded less like a husband and more like a man keeping score, claiming he'd paid off her debts and saved her. Pamela quickly pointed out there had never actually been a marriage certificate, and the whole thing dissolved into something closer to a rumor than a real marriage. Shortly after, her life took a quieter turn. During COVID lockdown, she returned to Vancouver Island and fell for Dan Hayhurst, the bodyguard hired to protect her property. Far from the yachts and headlines of her past, they married in a private ceremony on her land on Christmas Eve 2020, complete with a traditional cedar blessing from the Coast Salish Band. She called it her fairy tale. But the peace didn't last. By early 2022, they'd split, with reports suggesting she realized he wasn't the man she'd believed him to be. Underneath all the chaos of the relationships was something that lasted far longer, decades of genuine animal rights activism. Her work with PETA started in the early 90s and never really stopped, including deliberately controversial anti-fur campaigns built around statements like preferring to go nude rather than wear fur. She used the public's perception of her to push causes people might otherwise ignore, even while being mocked for it. In the late 90s, she bought a raw stretch of oceanfront land in Malibu for $1.8 million and spent roughly $8 million more building her dream home, a 5,500 square foot eco-conscious property with teak wood. solar panels, glass walls, and a private path straight to the beach. It wasn't just a mansion. It was where she raised her sons and tried to build a stable life, far from her public image. But by 2013, the upkeep had become a genuine financial strain, and an attempt to sell it for $7.75 million stalled amid reports of financial trouble. She pulled it off the market. Then in 2021, after the John Peters chapter, and her move back to Canada, she relisted it for $14.9 million. It eventually sold that August for $11.8 million, a huge profit on paper, but emotionally it meant closing a chapter that held her children's entire childhood. What it really came down to was simple. She wanted to go home. Malibu had given her plenty, but Canada offered something she needed more: space, memory, and a life that belonged to her again. She married Dan Hayhurst on the same family property where her own parents had gotten married, calling it full circle, a decision built on healing, reflection, and a desire for something far more real than the fame that had defined her for 30 years.